Hey, we got the clear to go, so we're going to go ahead and do our study for tonight. We are on our sixth study, Genesis chapter 6. You can turn in your Bibles to there, and we have a few things that I just like to talk about before we get to Genesis 6, because my guess is we're going to want to spend a lot of time talking on Nephilim and all this, but Nephilim are not the main point of Genesis chapter 6, so we also want to keep different subjects in their appropriate time constraints, because really the Nephilim only take up the first 4 verses, and then the whole rest is about wickedness and faithfulness. And the main point can be found verse 22, dealing with Noah. Said, "Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him, so he did." In other words, Noah did everything that God had asked of him, and that's the main point of Genesis 6, and that is the gateway into Genesis 7 with the actual flood and the time on the ark. So we will try to focus on that as much as possible, but also let me say this. We've talked about several different things in this class, some things that are... So Ernie came into the office this last week, and he sat down, he said, "After your Genesis class, I think I need therapy." So we've talked about those types of things, and we've also covered the basics along the way. So we have some leniency to cover both of those areas. So as we talk about this stuff, feel free to ask questions, and then also give opposing arguments to my point of view or other points of view. I'm all down for this. This is my thought. There are certain things that don't necessarily matter in the sense that they're not salvational. And then there's also things that, so I think when Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 6, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." When he says, "I am the truth," and we also remember John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and that word for word is logos, which is where we get our word logic. We can never follow the truth and not find Jesus. We can never follow the truth and not find Jesus. So I think it's healthy to have conversation, even if it's with people we disagree with or over things we disagree with, because the truth always leads us to Jesus, because Jesus is the truth. It's inevitable. And then before we get into all this, and let me preface with saying this, I am going to be like Switzerland and stay neutral, okay? There are 2 big theories when it comes to Nephilim, who that is, and we'll talk about both of them, and we'll talk about the strong points and the weak points of both. I've got guys that I look up to that are on both sides. I had professors that were on both sides. I have friends that are on both sides. I will tell nobody in this setting until 7:01 what side I'm on. Then you can ask me if you really want to know. But I will do my best to represent both sides accurately. That way you can choose based off of the scripture and logic, which is the most likely of the 2 theories. And hopefully I do a fair job at that. So before we get into that, the way an argument works, there's an argument out there called a deductive argument. And in that deductive argument, there are premises and a conclusion, okay? And this is important because we're going to go through this. And logic is just a good thing to know as a whole, how it works in a formal way. And the way you often condense an argument, instead of just doing a tit-for-tat type of argument, is in a formal debate, you will simplify that argument to where you usually have a main premise, a tying premise, and a conclusion that naturally follows. And that does a few good things, because if your premises are true and your conclusion naturally follows your premises, then the argument is true. So the fewer components you have to an argument, the less there is for someone to attack, and there's a less that you have to debate on that, so you don't have to give as much of a defense. And it's simple. You never want to get confused. As soon as you lose your audience when you're giving an argument, you've lost the argument. So with that being said, let's practice it a little bit. So there's 3 different options here, and all 3 are a little different. One is true, and 2 of these are false in their own way. Okay, so this is the first one. Premise 1, all dogs are a part of the canine family. True or false? True. Premise 2, this is the time premise. Golden retrievers are canines. Is that true or false? Okay, conclusion, golden retrievers are dogs. Is this a solid argument or a bad argument? They're a part of the family. We all have, but they're dogs, right? Golden retrievers are dogs. This argument works. Here's another argument. Premise 1, all dogs have teeth. True or false? Yeah. Tying premise, golden retrievers have teeth. Conclusion, golden retrievers are dogs. Is this a good argument or a bad argument? Why is it a bad argument? So the first premise is incomplete. It is right, but it is incomplete. What are some other things that have teeth? Cats, sharks. Sharks have a lot. People, alligators, go down the list. Just about everything has teeth, right? So argument 2, is that a good or bad argument? Bad. Even though it said nothing incorrect, right? Because golden retrievers are dogs, golden retrievers have teeth, and all dogs have teeth. Everything about that is true, but the argument is bad. See how that works? Okay, and then here's a third one. All dogs are golden retrievers. True or false? False. Okay, since the first premise is true, what can we guess about the rest of the argument? Is it going to be true or false? False. Okay, pit bulls are not golden retrievers. That's true. Pit bulls are not dogs then. That's the conclusion of that argument. Is that true or false? It's false, right? Pit bulls are still dogs. So those are 3 different examples of arguments. You can see how something can say something false, and it is false in the conclusion. You can see how something can say everything right, but still be incomplete or false. And then you can see how when something is completely inclusive, and then the first and second premise are true, and the conclusion actually follows how it is always right. That is the simple way on how formal logic works. And we can do this with another example since we have the time for this. Premise 1. You guys ready? This is not on the notes. This is out of my head, so hopefully it works. Okay. Murder is the taking of innocent life. True or false? Murder is the taking of innocent life. Think it's false? But then is it murder or capital punishment? Yeah. Okay, let me say this. Intentional murder to an innocent party that is undeserving is murder. True. There, we did it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Babies are innocent. Okay, so the taking of an innocent baby is murder. See how that argument works? And let's do the argument from the other side. Let's do it from a pro-choice perspective, and let's see if we can identify where the issue is. Okay. I have control over my body. Premise 1. Premise 2. The baby is my body. Conclusion, I can do whatever I want with the baby. Where does that argument fall apart? Premise 2. Is the baby a part of the woman's body? Not in one sense, yes, but it's more than the woman's body, right? So that's how that would fall apart. You can see how those premises, it really is like politics. You have to investigate the words very carefully because it's in the slight nuances where they stand or where they fall. But you can see where that falls apart. And it always helps me to take different arguments, break them down into this format and see, does this actually stand up? Is this solid? Can I make it solid? If not, then it's not logical. And if so, then it is logical whether I like it or not. Okay, so now we've gone over that. I'm just using that because I'm going to use this format for Nephilim. So when we're discussing things such as Nephilim, there's autocorrect there. Our best chance at coming up with the eBay. eBay concussion. Best conclusion. Best conclusion is what that's supposed to say, not eBay concussion. So if we're trying to come up with the best conclusion, we have to use the best logic, is what that's supposed to say. It's not what it says whatsoever. But let me read Genesis chapter 6 and the first 4 verses there if you want to follow along. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days will be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Okay, so we have to figure out who are the Nephilim. Okay, who are the Nephilim? And the argument we're going to start, so theory A is this. Angels left heaven, cohabitated with women, and produced a hybrid humanoid species that was physical to humans in several ways, superior to humans in many physical ways. And then theory B, the godly line of Seth cohabitated with the cursed line of Cain and produced a vigorous and determined superior lineage. Okay? Those are the two different theories. And we're going to start with theory B. And the reason we're starting with theory B is because of something called Occam's razor. So Occam's razor is this kind of rule of life. So imagine for a second, this is the illustration they used to teach it. You're walking down the street and you hear pop, 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 pop. There's trotting behind you. Given our general area, what is the first thing you're going to assume that is? Amish, right? There's a horse behind you. Why would you not assume zebras, even though they walk the same way? We're not in Africa. It doesn't make sense in our general context. It's not common, okay? However, does that mean it's not a zebra? You could be surprised, but it's not likely a zebra, right? Unless there is evidence that makes you believe 100% it is a zebra, you should always assume it's an Amish horse if you hear it behind you, right? That is just the most common thing. So this is the way that argument looks. Premise 1, for miracles to be special, they must be uncommon and unexplainable through natural process. Is that true? Sure. Premise 2. So the reason why we should accept premise 1 is in premise 2, because natural process is the most common force. That is also true. Conclusion, we should assume something is natural instead of supernatural unless we are forced to believe it must in fact be supernatural. The conclusion follows. So that is a solid argument. Basically, if something happens, we should assume there's a natural reason for it to happen before we assume a miracle. Why? Because natural process is the most common process. And if miracles happen over and over and over again, would they be miracles? It'd be nature. So in order for something to be special like a miracle, it has to be special like a miracle. It's no longer something that draws your attention if it happens every single day. It only draws your attention if it is out of the ordinary. And then you still need good evidence to prove that is out of the ordinary. Okay. With that being said, there's two theories.
So how often do you think miracles happen?
So the question is, how often do you think miracles happen?
Should have been here for Sunday night.
That's right. You go to our YouTube page, you can see Dave's exposition on miracles. I would say that you would have to differentiate miracles with a capital M and miracles with a lowercase m. And what I mean by that is miracles with a capital M would be in my imagination, the terminal patient who is given a 0% chance to live by every single doctor all of a sudden being clear of cancer like that. That would be a miracle, capital M. If it's 0% chance, then no, it would not be.
What if you got 1,000 people that have 0%?
Well, that would be a good question. But you could theoretically put probability into any situation, because as long as it happened once, there's probability of one out. So I'll give you an example. So if we remember fractions, the top number is the numerator, the bottom number is the denominator. So how many planets do we know of that have life? One. Which one is that? This one. So we have one. How many planets do you think we know of? It's like 10 to the 16th power or something. So probability is 1 out of 10 to the 16th power, which means if we go 10 to the 32nd power, which I don't think that's the way math works in this case, but we double the denominator, then we should find a second planet that has life by math, right? The problem is, you're getting me into the weeds, Matt. There is a fallacy out there called reification of math. Reification of math simply means when you think that math has the power to cause something. So if I get a quarter, and what are the probability of it? What's the odds of a heads? Yeah, 50%. So if I flip the quarter, it lands on tails. If I grab that quarter, I go to flip it a second time, what one should it land on, hypothetically? Heads. But will it? Not necessarily. See, the fallacy of reification of math says, well, you land on heads or tails last time, now you have to land on heads this time. That's probability. But in reality, fractions are only descriptive. They're not prescriptive. They don't cause anything. So when the odds of something happens, who's to say that one isn't the miracle? You wouldn't know to differentiate. Now, if it is something that is common, so like take something like going out of the driveway here. I've got a 50% chance of going left, a 50% chance of going right. Okay, that's not a miracle if I do one or the other. That's pretty simple odds. But if we get 1 to 1,000 and everybody's not betting on the one and it manages to happen, all of a sudden, in my mind, that would be a miracle. So that would be, uppercase M miracle. But I think also God has providence. Dave and I talked about this one time. Think of all the factors that have led you here today. What's the very first thing that would have to happen in your life? You'd have to be born. Okay, now you can name all kinds of things after you're born to get here. But you can name a lot more things going back, because for you to be born, your parents had to meet one another, which means they had to be born, which meant their parents. And then also all the things that brought your parents together. So there's providence in that way. The odds of us being alive right now are incredibly slim, let alone being here and alive right now. Very, very, very slim. And in that way, I think there's these lowercase miracles where God's providence is working in our life. It's just a supernatural force. God is opening pathways for our life to go in a certain direction, not in a Calvinistic sense. We still have free will. But He is allowing that, and He has caused minute things to happen so that this can happen right here and right now. That's what I'd call the lowercase miracle. So I would say those happen all the time. The guy that has no money in his bank account and then next thing you know gets a check in the mail, I don't think that's a miracle, capital M. I think that's a miracle, lowercase m, through God's providence. But I think God is still causing that just from behind the stage. Okay, so out of the weeds. So with that being said, we have this idea of, should we follow the natural? Should we always assume the supernatural? And we agreed based off of the argument we should follow the natural, the one that requires the least supernatural, because that's the most common. And that should make us, our default position should be theory B. Our default position should be theory B, that the Nephilim are the descendants of Seth and Cain. That's where we should begin. And then if we agree or disagree, it has to be based off of the evidence. But the natural is where we will start, okay? I see you squirming.
Yeah, because I disagree with your first premise. Because for you to say that, you're assuming
Remember, I'm Switzerland. I'm neutral. I'm giving both sides.
your statement is assuming that you're talking about the Nephilim being the men of renown.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read that, it talks about first two that talk about the sons of God, daughters of humans. Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also afterwards. That's just stating after the flood. But then it goes back to when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and children by them, and they were the heroes of old, men of renown. It may not be the Nephilim they're talking to there. It could be the giants later on, because they had to bring it up now to make it fit later on, which I haven't taken that. But they may be different. And in that premise,
Well, the premise isn't necessarily that these guys aren't angelic human offspring. The first premise was that we should always assume the natural before the supernatural, and that one is true.
I agree. And the Nephilim were natural. I can prove it. But the men of renown, I think that's who the Seth is. Those are that. The Nephilim's separate to them. They just put it in there to bring them up because they're important in history.
So that is a potential argument for this. And like I said, what I will do is, because I think theory B should be the default because that's the least supernatural, I will go through the explanations, and then the way that you guys will get to decide on which theory to take will be based off whether or not you think these are satisfactory, and if you can think there's arguments that would prove it must require a supernatural. Because are supernatural things, are miracles possible? Yeah. How do we know that? Because God exists, right? He can do whatever he wants. So they are possible. But once again, we should always assume the natural because that is most common. And that being said, one of the reasons why it's important to take this position, even if it results in saying, okay, the natural is not satisfactory and it must be a supernatural, it must be a miracle for this to happen, is because we never want to read miracles into the Bible. We want to discover miracles out of the Bible. Right? We don't want to read stuff into the text. We want to draw stuff out of the text. So, that being said, there's two positions, or a few different words, and we'll talk about these words. So, sons of God. So, in the Bible, this can refer to angels or faithful people. The Israelites were often called the sons of God, but they weren't angels. But we also know that the angels refer to the sons of God in different contexts. So, when it says the sons of God look down, that does not mean that it has to be angels or that it has to be godly people, right? That is a neutral term. The next one, son of man, that can refer to humans in general or to the worst of humanity. And the Psalms, you can find David quoting, such a worm am I, what am I, a son of man that you would look down on me, right? So it can be very negative, and it can also be very neutral, just a human. How many times do you think Jesus called himself a son of man? Over and over and over and over again. And even prophets like Ezekiel, right? Prophesy to the brethren, son of man. So it's not always used in a negative light, but it is used to either say you're a human or you're the worst of humanity. Those are the two sides of that. Heroes of old, men of renown. Okay, so here's a natural explanation of this. And once again, that's what I'm giving, and then we'll talk about the others. Okay, so do we know of some families historically that have had multi-generational success? Sure, right? The Kennedys, the Bushes, the Rockefellers. There's people who, their families have been very, very successful, line after line. And then also you look back in ancient history with Spartans, not so much the Romans, but especially with the Spartans. There were families that were known for their valor in war. And to be married into their family was like to be married into a rich family, because the Spartans didn't value money, they valued how good you can fight. Where we would, the very earthly version of marrying successful or marrying up is marrying someone who's more attractive or marrying someone who has more money. not someone who has better character, ironically. But the Spartan idea of marrying up was marrying into a family that was more noble and had more honor. So, yeah, there are families that men of renown, heroes of old, people who have success. So there are some arguments, though, or let me say, Jude 6, 2 Peter 2. So you can read through both those chapters. And what we find is that it will talk about the angels that fell, and then it moves to Noah, and then it moves to Abraham, and then Egypt, and goes through how basically God has not spared judgment on any of these people. What makes you think that He's going to spare judgment on you? It's what both those passages can more or less be summed up to. But just because the angels left their position before the flood of Noah doesn't necessarily mean it happened at this moment. That could have happened at the garden. When do we know one of the timeline of when one of the angels fell? Satan. When was that? The garden. And which is at least 1,500 years before Noah, right? So we don't know when all the angels fell, right? We don't know when they left their heavenly position. We know when Satan did, and it's possible that they followed Satan. It's also possible it happened at Cain or any other time, so we don't necessarily know exactly when they fell, but it could be at this moment, but it doesn't have to be at this moment. That being said, arguments that need explanation for the natural side. And there are some. So one of the reasons I'm also neutral in this is because I think both theories have flaws. I think that theory A, so that angels came down, cohabitated with women, created physical giants, I think its largest flaws are found in the conclusions. And then theory B, I think most of its flaws are found in the premises, the upfront side of it. And because of that, I am not dogmatic on one or the other. There's things that I think we know fairly well and are more straightforward, such as age of the earth, deity of Jesus, things that we can take all the numbers, add them up, and here it is. Or Jesus saying, like John 8:58, unless you believe I am, Exodus 3:14, you will surely die in your sins. Or before Abraham was, I am. Over and over, he quotes the name of God. So there are things in the Bible that are very obvious, but there are also things that aren't as obvious, and there's leeway on both sides. And to me, Nephilim, though I do sway on one side, Nephilim is one of those positions that I don't know if we know 100%. And I never want to say I know 100% and then get to heaven and be like, whoops, I want to be 100% on the things I can be 100% about. But arguments that need explanation, if this is natural, you have to explain these things. The first one I have here, and these are in order of importance. What about mythology? These men of renown, the heroes of old, these guys that are superior in every single way. You look at mythology, right? And you almost wonder, maybe they say behind every legend there's an ounce of truth. Maybe that ounce of truth is that there were, in fact, people that were seemingly superior. You look at the Olympics. Does anyone know where we got the Olympics from? What group of people? The Greeks. There are records that the Greeks set that we still have not come anywhere close to in the same games, right? Even proportionately, we've not come close to beating some of their records, and they almost seem unhuman when you read like the long jump record and different things that they would do. And we've got guys that were like, oh, they could definitely beat them, and we're not even getting halfway to where they were at. So maybe that's a thing, right? Why is it that there's some records and some history out there that seems to be different, superior to us in a physical way? That's just something to consider. It's not a mind-blowing argument, but it's an argument. How about Goliath? Does anyone remember how tall Goliath stood? 9'9". 9'9". Right to the inch. I love it. 9 foot 9 inches. Does anyone know? I bet you don't know this. How tall is the tallest man in our history? He's dead now, but how tall was he? Nope, shorter. taller. 8'11". The tallest man we've ever recorded is 8'11". And by the age of 20, he was walking with a cane and died before he even made his 40s, if I remember right. And does Goliath seem to have any physical impairments? No, he's 9'9", so way taller than our tallest. And he's not out there hobbling with a cane. He's out there wearing heavy armor with a big sword, and he's the greatest warrior they have. Which means that it's more than gigantism, which is what a lot of people say, because gigantism often leads to heart attacks and feeble bones and that sort of thing. So Goliath is something that the person that takes the natural response has to wonder. How about the Canaanites? So remember, they sent out the 12 spies. They go, 10 are unfaithful, 2 are faithful. What did they say about the people? We're grasshoppers. They're giants. What did they say about the fruit of that land? They're huge. How many people did it take to carry a bushel of grapes there? 2 men, right? Could this be you have 10 yellow belly spies that are making metaphor in line? Sure, it could be, because we know that they didn't have faith. Could it be that the grasshoppers is metaphor? Sure, it could be, but Goliath was one of these Canaanites. He came from the same region. And he's not metaphorically 9'9". He's literally 9'9". So that is an argument that you have to deal with if you're on the natural side. And then what about other records of giants? You go through the Bible, there's the Anakim and many others that are noted as being tall. I don't want to be quoted with this, but historically, through non-biblical sources, there are reports of giants. Most of them have been falsified. Example of like the Loveless Caves. There's a Native American, I believe she was a princess, notes about how there's these red-haired cannibal giants that were killing, and they were great in battle. They could catch the arrows right out of the air, put them in their bow, and send them right back and kill their men. And so they talk about this. They go to the cave, and the tallest person they find is 6 feet. And then they find out that this tribe is only 5 feet tall. Okay? So that's why I'm really nervous about quoting history, because some of them are giants in comparison, not giants as a whole. That being said, have we found some very tall skeletons? Yeah. They found one skeleton in that cave that was 8 foot. The rest were 6 foot. In Rome, they found a man that was 6 foot, and they called him a giant because or 6'5". And is that a giant in America? No, that's pretty average. Even back then, So side story: the first church I took a ministry at, Montpelier, Indiana, was the congregation, and I went down to I was going to use the bathroom, and this building was old. It was old. And the old like baseball stadium chairs that were made out of like oak, and they had the cast iron brackets? They bought those new when they opened the building. So incredibly old. And the doors there, the average door, the biggest door they had was 30 inches. Okay, that's not very big for today. Standard now is 36. And the small door today is 32, and their biggest was 30. Like people back then were incredibly small. So if I saw a 6'5" guy, and if we see a 6'5" guy today, we're still like, that's a big guy, But back then, when the average person's 5'4", that's a really big guy, right? A whole head over top, and you also think of Saul, right? He was a head and shoulders above everybody, and the average Israelite during that time was about 5'4". So Saul was no bigger than the average American man today, but he was a giant in their eyes. So that's why I'm careful with quoting history about records of giants. But once again, the Bible does talk about the Anakim, and they seem to be giants. But anyways, there are several arguments on both sides. And I think the main point of all this isn't necessarily which one. Hopefully there's, if anything, we've learned we do have to be careful on what side we go, just because we never want to be put into a corner that, or you never want to fight a battle that's not worth losing your life over, if you will. You know, they say you have to choose what mountains to fight for and that sort of thing. So to me, I put this in that category where I kind of lean more this way, but I can see arguments and holes for both sides. And with that being said, let's get to Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 through 8. Then the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thought of his heart was on evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So we see that humankind had failed God. That's the first thing we see here. Humankind failed God. And we see that God is sorry for the creation of mankind. And some verses, or some versions of the Bible even say that God repented, that he was so sorry that he repented. Now, does that mean that God made a mistake in the sense that he sinned? No. I think of it kind of like this. So we raised some chickens, and I won't get into the graphics of this, but the chickens died this past Monday. They were sent off into the processor. Well, a few days before, we had a coon reach in and couldn't quite kill this chicken, but hurt it beyond healing compatibility, right? Would have taken a miracle uppercase M to heal this guy. So he wasn't dead, he wasn't alive, and I had to help him through this process. He only finished half the race. I was going to help him to the finish line. And we have chickens from time to time that we have to kill them. Like the ones we killed Monday, right? I didn't like having to take in all these chickens to know, oh, I raised you up, I fed you out of this hand, you liked me, and you know, like no one likes doing that. But I also like eating chicken. So I'm in this position now where there's a sense of awkwardness, and there is immediate regret in the sense that I don't like having to do that, right? I don't find joy out of killing things. But the ultimate end is it justifies this action. This is okay because it gets to this. Not that the means always justify the ends or that type of thing. But you think here, God wants a people that will have a relationship with him. And all of a sudden, everybody but 8 people turn away from this. And what does God have to do? He has to destroy them. And who ultimately is this for? God works primarily for the faithful. Who are the faithful? Noah and the 7 with him. So somehow we have to understand that the killing of all of humankind was for the sake of Noah. How can that be? What might have happened to Noah given enough time with these people? Either him or his sons. Yeah, eventually they could have persecuted him if they didn't convert him, right? And so ultimately, God knows that this is the best ultimate thing. This is the best thing, but to get to there, this has to happen. Dave?
I don't want to jump ahead of you, but you don't have to answer this question. But if you've heard a good explanation as to why God enough room on the ark for all the animals.
So I've never heard, I don't think there is a great explanation in this way. Sometimes we jump the gun a little too quick, just in other areas, to say, well, this is a good thing. And you can never have a bad thing happen and do it perfectly. When you have to do a thing that's not perfect, there is no perfect way to do an imperfect thing. And killing is, by default, imperfect, okay? So when I think of this, and try to think of a modern illustration. So self-defense. Is self-defense a okay thing? I believe it is from a biblical standpoint. I think it is. But what has to happen for self-defense, proper self-defense, to take place? You have to be attacked. And is that a good thing? No. So even though you do the okay thing of defending yourself, you still potentially might have to kill the man that attacks you. So even though it was justified, it's not the perfect thing, if you will. Dave?
That's a good point, but I've always thought God knows everything about us and everybody. Ruled with wicked tongue. He knew the minds and the futures of all those children. He may have known that down the road they're going to go evil. Every one of them. It's his people. He created them. He knows it. He said, this is time. They're going to be okay. The rest aren't. I'm doing away with it. He knows it.
Yeah.
He knows their thoughts and their minds and their future.
Dave? Or Dylan? Well, and I also think this, so though what you said could highly, maybe even likely be the case, I guess I've always just assumed that children are naturally innocent, and as a result, not to use terms that are so light, but get a free pass, if you will, in the sense that there's innocence. And with that being the case, every time you hear someone talk about heaven, you never hear them talking about it with reservation, like, man, you don't want to go there. Paul says, it's better that I die, but unfortunately, I've got to be here to help you guys, right? That's what he says to the Philippian church. So in that way, what could God do to give them any more grace than to put him in his presence? But that being said, all this in a very practical way today doesn't necessarily help that feeling, right? Because death is unnatural. It wasn't created by God. Death is not God's thing. That is sin's thing. So there's no perfect way for death to happen because it is an imperfect thing by its very being. However, heaven is perfect, and no matter what you go through on earth, heaven ultimately is worth it.
Verse 5 says about all wickedness in their hearts is be bred into them. Like when you breed something for a certain quality, you one way and then you kill one you don't want, and you
Yeah, well, there is definitely a level where, to some degree, you inherit certain traits, not necessarily sin, but traits that can lead to sin if you don't use your free will properly.
said their hearts were all
Yeah.
evil constantly.
Yeah.
So that would be, yeah, to separate some of them.
Yeah, what are the odds that a wicked nation can raise a righteous, generation?
Couldn't this just fall in the actual process of getting all of these kids? The big picture.
Well, I would say this is Satan working to corrupt mankind, because you ever notice after the time of Jesus, a lot of things calmed down in the Bible? You think that's because Satan is no longer at work trying to destroy all of the children that can grow up to be Messiah, but now he's just destroying Christians? I think that's the case. And what's neat about that, and this is just a thought for you, and we'll get on to the next chunk here. Abortion. Think of Satan's role in abortion. So we see a lot of ground being made for abortion from the pro-life side, the Dobbs decision and some things like that. But for Satan, abortion must be a unique thing, because in killing the child and bringing that child to God, he's not really disqualifying the child, but rather he's disqualifying the parents. And unfortunately, anyone that child could have grown up to have influence on. But that's a unique thing. So it makes me wonder, we often think abortion, though I think it is evil, we always think that's the thing that Satan's trying to do. I think he's doing more than that, because that's very one for one. I think he's attacking us in ways that we don't always understand. And I'm sure this nation had several ways of thinking, well, it's okay, they could justify, whatever. But little did they know, they went from Enoch, who was faithful, to now, where everybody is wicked, except for 8 people. We'll get to that. So Genesis 6, or 9 through 22, this is the end of it. These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and you shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, its height, 30 cubits. And you shall make a window for the ark, finish it to the cubit from the top, and set a door on the ark in the side of it. And you shall make it lower, second and third decks. And behold, I, even I, am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2, of every kind into the ark, keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And as for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. Thus Noah did, according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. So, here, Noah had managed to stay pure and did not get corrupted. And we all know James 1:27, that true religion is what? Yeah, take care of the widows and orphans. And the very beginning of it is to stay undefiled by the stains of this world. Staying undefiled by the stains of this world. And the way you do that is by helping the least of these. If you help the least of them, then you know that you've not been corrupted by the world, because the world is all about me, right? So he stayed faithful. And in verse 18, we see that God made a covenant with Noah, and that's the Noahic covenant. And we talked about a little bit last week what this might look like. I line up that I think Noah is a vegetarian, and his whole family were vegetarians at this point, because it's not till after they're commanded to kill and eat. And then also the food that they're told to bring is imperishable food, which on the ark would be very few things. It'd be anything that is preserved, and the easiest thing to preserve are often grains. Probably not eating beef jerky. That being said, later he would be told to kill, and we learn from elsewhere in the scripture that of every clean animal, he could bring 7. So God thought ahead of this. He provided 7 of every clean animal, which means that he would have animals for sacrifice and animals for food, and still have enough they could go and repopulate. Where the unclean animals, he can't eat them, he can't sacrifice them, so they just need 2. And if you've ever been to the Ark Encounter, it's pretty incredible, but it's neat, and they show how you can put everything in there, and how you walk around and they've got a room for everything you would ever need, and you can still walk through it. Like, it's a pretty incredible place to go if you've never been there. And I just have a few questions here. The first one's not on the notes, but how many people were spared? We said the number a few times. How many people were spared? 8. Okay, we often think the world is really bad right now, and it is in some ways. But their world got so bad that there were only 8 that walked with God. And we don't even know the other 7 were overly faithful. In fact, we know one of them wasn't. We learned that after they get off the ark. But it's possible these 7 were only tagged along with Noah because of Noah's faithfulness. We see that with Lot, right? Lot never does anything special, but because of the faith of Abraham, he's spared. Which says something about staying faithful in your house, right? Says something about that.
So when Jesus says that, and the disciples are asking, generalizing and saying that this is what's going to basically happen.
I wouldn't say the flood, because remember the rainbow and stuff, but as far as a dwindling population, quite possibly. So like when Jesus talks about and the final coming of the Lord, it'd be like the days of Noah. And there is a rhetorical question there, will I find anyone? Right? Will anyone be found faithful?
Exactly.
Which makes me think that definitely not a very easy number to count. But think of it this way. If there were 8 faithful during that time, how many are faithful here? At least twice, if not 3 times as many. Which means at the very least, our world is 2 or 3 times better than theirs. Think about how many Christians there are across the globe. Our world is pretty corrupt, but it is still thousands of times better than Noah's world. And one that should make us grateful in one way, and it should give us hope, but it should also give us compassion for what Noah had to go through to be faithful, to be, of all the people there, right, one of the last. Not just, the remnant of thousands, but 8. That would have been an awful, awful, awful world. And what's neat is a lot of times when you look at how awful a nation has become, often God puts a number on how many faithful people are there. He does that with Elijah. He does that with Abraham. And he does that here with Noah. When he wants to show how wicked a nation, he always points to how few Christians are there. Now, what's the correlation then? If you have a lot of Christians in a nation, should it lean towards good or bad? Should lean towards good if they're actual Christians, right? And if a nation is starting to lean towards bad, what does that say about the state of Christianity in that nation? The Christianity is gone. That's the one that's spiraling down. It's not the world that has influence on the Christians. It's the Christians that have influence on the world around it. We have the power. They kind of just steadily do that. But what's interesting is that the nations rise or fall based off how many Christians are in them, which means it's up to us. We always blame them, but it's really up to us. And Philippians also mentions that. Towards the end, it says, let's just read it.
Do you think, real quick, do you think that's why the commandment where it says honor thy father and thy mother, and it basically offers a reward for longevity?
I think that's the idea because...
So it's not the longevity of the actual individual, it's the longevity of a nation.
Well, I think the nation lasts long by the men doing well and being preserved, but... Turn to Philippians here. My Bible got a little wet, sticking together. Okay, 128. No way be alarmed by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction for them, but salvation for you, and that too from God. So are we supposed to be alarmed at the destruction of the world at its down spiral? No. And it says if you're not alarmed, that's a sign of their destruction, right? If you have confidence even in all this, that means that you're doing well. That's a sign of your salvation, their destruction. What's the opposite of that? If we are alarmed, switch them around. That's a sign of their salvation and our destruction. We're supposed to be taking the offensive play here, not the defensive. He says, don't be alarmed. And as soon as you have enough confidence where you're not alarmed, that means they're going down and you have salvation in the Lord. Where the opposite is, if we are alarmed, and that's like one of those woes to us that the Bible always gives. That is their salvation. As soon as you're afraid, that means the world is winning. not the Christian faith. And Jesus has overcome the world, hasn't he? So why are we alarmed? No, it wasn't. Okay, so let me ask you these 3 questions. How can Noah's faithfulness, despite the evil in the world, give us hope as Christians today? How can Noah's faithfulness, despite the evil in the world, give us hope today? I didn't hear either of those, sorry. Yeah, the world is not our standard of faithfulness. Jesus is ultimately, right? What were you saying, Noah? You're not that old. Woody? What were you saying, Woody? Okay, sorry. Any other thoughts on how can Noah's faithfulness, despite the evil in the world, give us hope? Yeah. He'll take care of us even if we're the last one. Okay, how can God's attention to detail give us assurance? And what I'm referencing here is he gave him exactly how to build this ark. So God is a very detailed man. He's methodical. He thinks things through, and he gives us the plan as we need it. We don't have to have much creativity on our own. So how is God's attention to detail something that's able to give us assurance? Scriptures, right? If he's attentive to detail, everything we need should be found in them, right? Nothing's left out. He didn't forget anything. I think those small things in God's providence in our life that he's brought into our life, like, our brothers and sisters in Christ and all those elements that help us in our faith. I think those are a big way that, he knows what we need and he gives before we often even ask of it. Okay, and then last one. So I'm thinking in context of this question. So before the Noahic covenant ever even started, God said, you need 2 of these, you need 7 of these, you need to make all this way. He put a lot of burden on Noah. And it didn't make sense. Like, why do I need these? And why do I need 7 of those? And why does the ark have to be over here? Or the door have to be over here? And why does there need to be these many levels? But did Noah really know what was coming up? He knew kinda, right? Because God said, hey, I'm going to destroy you, but you get to live. So he kind of knew, but did he know everything that was about to happen? So with that being in mind, can God ask us to do things that we think are strange, but in reality are beneficial to us in the long term? Even if we don't understand it? Yeah, what might be some examples of those? Why do you think of that? Here's one from the Old Testament. The male children were supposed to be born on the 8th day, or they were supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day. And on the 8th day is when vitamin K, which is what clots your blood, is the highest it will ever be in your whole life. They didn't know that, but God knew that, right? That's one of those ways that he asks us to do weird things, and we find out it actually benefits us. Yeah. Yeah, or, clean your room. Train a kid to clean their room and you set them on that precedent, odds are they'll have a cleaner life. Things will be in order. And there's certain things in our life that I think do train us. Like we think of giving offerings and taking communion and all these Christian disciplines that there are out there. Though they might seem weird, like, well, why do you, if you own a cattle on 1,000 hills, why do you need my $50? That type of thing. And then we find out, well, that's actually also for my benefit because that develops me and makes me look beyond myself. And also, through that, I learn how to be a good steward, which helps me when I have more money or, when I have more things to use for you. So all the time, I think God is asking us to do things that we don't understand, but we find out, when we look in hindsight that was a pretty good idea. Any other thoughts on that? At 7:01, I told you I would tell you my thoughts on the Nephilim. I lied. You can ask me personally. Okay, that being said, Dave, do you want to close us in prayer?